Engage webinar. We are very glad that you could join us in this last webinar of the year. In this session, we would like to go through a couple of items to bring you up to speed. First, we give a very short introduction on the Engage initiative, but we'll keep it short because I think most of you are familiar with our initiative. And then we would like to look into some of the regulatory updates, specifically the Q&A on the EU taxonomy that was published earlier this month in the official European journal. And in particular, there are some items there in relation to the EU taxonomy that really influences also how we need to report on the data. So we'll look into that, and we'll look also into what this could potentially mean for the Engage templates itself. Next, we will look into the Engage portal. We'll give you a preview on really how it works and also really the output that comes out of the EU taxonomy assessment report. And lastly, we would like to also explain what's next also in the coming year and how you can participate in this initiative. My name is Vincent Mieux. I work at Hyperport, and today I will be doing this webinar together with my colleague Gijs Verschuur and my colleague at European Data Warehouse, Gianluca Cinelli. So first, a short introduction. Engage, we are a European funded market initiative of a couple of European consortium members. And what we are trying to design and maintain together is a standard for residential mortgage loan reporting in terms of ESG, in particular in relation to the EU taxonomy, because we noticed that with the EU taxonomy really introduces a lot of new obligation in terms of ESG reporting. There's no dedicated template for loans or mortgage loans. So that's a gap we try to fill in this project. And basically the Engage consists out of two components. The first one is a set of template add-ons, basically where we created an ingredient list for mortgage loans to comply with the EU taxonomy. It's kind of a modular set of templates that we have designed with data fields for existing loans, mortgages for new buildings, for renovation loans, and depending on your needs, you can use several sections of these templates. Well, in second, we've also created a portal, and in this portal, and we'll have a look into this today, parties are also able to upload this data via the Engage input template. And basically the portal does a calculation, an assessment to what degree the portfolio is in line with taxonomy criteria of the Climate Delegated Act. On the right-hand side, you see the consortium members that are participating in this initiative out of Europe. And of course, here also a link to register for the Engage templates, but we will show that again also at the end of the presentation. And roughly over 550 EU financial institutions have already signed up and downloaded the template. I actually think it's more now, to closer to 60 financial institutions. So if you're interested, have a look into this. So, as I already mentioned, really the core of our project, but also in terms of the EU Sustainable Finance Framework, is the EU taxonomy. And we see that arise in a lot of other regulations, directives, and reporting frameworks. So it's not just the EU taxonomy reporting itself, but we see it coming back into the EU Green Bond Standard, CSRD, policy developments like the EU Renovation Wave, but also, for instance, in programs initiated by the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund. The long story short, the essence here is that the EU taxonomy criteria itself are really the common denominator of basically all the data that is needed. So that's for us a very concrete void that we try to fill in. in terms of mortgage loan reporting. Well, as already explained, taxonomy is really at the core, where we look into the Climate Delegated Act. And as you might know, it consists of several subsections, this EU taxonomy, and we are mainly focused on the components of the substantial contribution criteria and the do no significant harm criteria. Because there we see that basically to do the EU taxonomy assessment, we need quite detailed data, either on a building or building unit level for the substantial contribution. And for the do no significant harm, this relates often more to data like environmental climate risk data. So both components have been incorporated into our template proposal. And the way we set that up is that we designed this template really from making a flexible add-on to the existing mortgage loan data that we see being used in Europe. So we've looked at what is the most granular data that is currently being used for loan reporting or mortgage loan reporting. And we see that most parties in Europe use the templates that are used for the securitization regulation disclosure. So there you have the so-called Annex 2 and Annex 6 with templates for loan information and underlying exposure information, the collateral, the buildings for the loans. And we've created we've merged basically the ESG data that is needed for the EU taxonomy compliance. And what is really important here to explain is that even though we borrowed or lent heavily from the standards that are being used in the securitization regulation, the project that we have here with Engage is transaction agnostic. So it can be used for all kinds of transaction structure. So this could be a cover bond, a mortgage portfolio, a wall loan portfolio, a mortgage fund. It doesn't need to be per se for a securitization portfolio. It can be used for all kinds of asset portfolios, although the focus is on residential loans. So that really brought us to dovetailing the existing mortgage loan reporting with the missing green components. And that was really a big part of the design of Engage. We've looked into what are the gaps here for substantial contribution and do no significant harm. And we've made a template for this, and that's actually in development by finding all the common denominators that one would need to report on the ESG components of a mortgage loan portfolio. That's in essence what the Engage consortium is and what we do here. But I think it's also relevant now to look into where we are now. But before we do that, also some regulatory updates that really, let's say, have an impact on the taxonomy reporting for residential loans. I think first one, which is a really interesting one, is that the Hellenic Financial Stability Fund published its sustainability report, and they've really basically given a public support in this for the Engage initiative, really highlighting that the Engage fills the gaps for sustainable finance. And we are extremely happy basically with this endorsement. And we see more and more parties, but also government parties really picking up the Engage template and seeing the added value that we have in Engage as an ESG add-on to existing reporting. So I highly recommend those that are interested to look into this report. Next, the Commission notice, which is a fancy word of a Q&A or frequently asked questions document, has been published in the EU official journal earlier this month. Quite a lot of journals came out recently or over the last 3 years on the EU taxonomy, and this one is really related to the Article 8 disclosure. And there are a couple of items we wanted to highlight. These are basically 6 findings that we deem relevant for real estate, but also for the Engage template that we want to highlight here. Some of them we have already mentioned earlier this year, but it's good to remember that when this Commission notice was first published, it was a draft document, and now it has been officially published in the journal. So yeah, thereby it has a more official status. Couple of takeaways we want to highlight are the following. So we picked these out because they are relevant. That's answer 19. So when a member state changes the NZEP criteria, a reassessment of EU taxonomy alignment should take place. It's answer 20, when to use criteria 7.71 and how to apply the top 15. We'll look into some of these. We have an answer related to the extrapolation and estimation of EPCs. The next one is on expired EPCs and how they relate to the top 15% reporting. The next one is on the basically the frequency to which EU taxonomy disclosures should be submitted. And the last one is on minimum safeguards reporting in relation to the EU taxonomy. Now, going through some of them, we highlighted the most important part here. And I think this one is an interesting one, specifically now with the introduction, also with the new energy performance for buildings directive that has been published earlier this year. That, of course, in member states over time, the building criteria and the EPC criteria changes. So EU member states should have incorporated throughout Europe the NZEP criteria. Within 1 or 2 years, they should incorporate the ZEP criteria, zero emission building criteria, as described in EPPD 4. And I think this is a really interesting comment here that the Q&A mentions that, yeah, whenever the national regulation or criteria in terms of energy performance changes, you need to redo the taxonomy assessment. So I think this is a welcome answer, and this has a direct consequences, I think, also for the data and the taxonomy assessment from our perspective. Well, second, how can you choose either the top 15% criterion or the EPC Class A label criterion? So these are criteria for existing buildings. And really the Commission here highlights that you can choose whichever you want, as long as you don't double count a building in both sub-criteria. One could say that this is logical, this makes sense, but I do think it's good that it's highlighted. And this is, I think, also a good example of a check that we incorporate within Engage, where we have a check that, for instance, even though it's potentially you unaware or by mistake, the same underlying exposure is not double counted for 2 separate taxonomy criteria. Next. How to assess basically if a building is green for 7.7, acquisition and ownership of a building. So you cannot do this assessment purely based on an extrapolation of statistics on the national building stock. I think apparently this was a question that was raised by some market participants, but you really have to prove this on an underlying exposure level that either there is really an EPC certificate present that is still valid as of the assessment date, or the building is in the top 15 and adequate evidence or a study should be provided for this top 15 report. Basically a variant on the previous question, what to do with EPCs that are expired? Well, I think as an extension of the previous question, there should really be a valid EPC certificate. Commonly throughout Europe, there are some deviations, but in most cases, EPCs have a legal maturity of 10 years. There are some deviations in some regions in Europe, but the standard seems to be 10 years. But of course, sometimes they expire. Then you cannot automatically either use them or put them in the top 15%. There really needs to be some adequate evidence to do this. So it's good to keep that in mind as well, and something we also incorporated in the template. And then fifth, confirmation that the taxonomy alignment should be reviewed at least on an annual basis. I think that's a good remark, because we've received also some questions. How often should you do the taxonomy assessment? Well, at least annually. And then 6, I think, is a really interesting one, and that is on an entity that claims taxonomy alignment in relation to the minimum safeguards. Now, this is a little bit of a strange answer that the Commission gives here, because as you might know, there are no technical screening criteria for minimum safeguards. And secondly, the minimum safeguards basically apply to undertakings only. This has also been underlined in 2022 in a report on written by the Platform on Sustainable Finance on this very topic. But I think answer 37 in this document has a really, let's say, interesting angle on this topic, and they highlight a particular example that we have highlighted in this slide as well. And that is in relation to, let's say, a energy efficiency renovation. So what I want you to look at is that, for instance, here, where it's highlighted in yellow, it stated that the situation concerned, for instance, a loan provided to a retail client, let's say a homeowner, for instance, for the purchase of a solar panel. Yeah, in this case, the credit institution needs to ascertain the compliance with the relevant technical screening criteria and the minimum safeguards by the manufacturer of those goods to assess if that loan for the solar panel is taxonomy aligned. Yeah, I think that's quite a, let's say, was a surprising remark. And that does have some consequences also for the EU taxonomy assessment, specifically for renovations and new constructions. I'll look into that in the next slides. To give an example here, so typically what we've seen here is the traditional example where in our scope we look into a financial institution that gives to the residential homeowner a loan, and the homeowner repays that loan. And it depends a little bit on what kind of economic activity we're looking at according to the Climate Delegated Act. There are certain criteria for this, either for new constructions, renovation, or the acquisition of a home. So in this case, we look into Chapter 7, and the bank, as illustrated here by the green arrow pointing downwards, has to do a check on, let's say, if the building is green according to the EU taxonomy, or whether the renovation is green or the new construction is green. I think for most of us, this is, I think, very familiar information. But now with answer 37 of the EU Commission, we have a slightly different situation. Let's take an example here where the residential homeowner uses the money he receives from the financial institution and uses these funds to improve the energy efficiency of his home and renovation. So he uses these funds to buy a solar panel. Then in this case, what the answer says of the Q&A is stated that, and you see that here on the left-hand side in the lower corner, the credit institution or the financial institution needs to ascertain the compliance with the relevant technical screening criteria and the minimum safeguards by the manufacturer of those goods to assess such loan as taxonomy aligned. So in essence, what is happening here, this green line going downwards is not sufficient to really assess the taxonomy alignment of this loan if this homeowner uses these funds to buy a solar panel. Instead, the financial institution should now also assess the manufacturer of this solar panel. That is the example that is now given in answer 37. And this is, well, let's say, quite an interesting fact, and also from our perspective, somewhat new. This has not really been described, this use case, either in level 1 or level 2 regulation, because the peculiar case is here that the financial institution, in the situation we described, has no economic or financial relation to the manufacturer. He simply borrows money to the residential homeowner. But now, even though there is no economic or financial relation to the manufacturer, he does need to assess whether that solar panel is made in line with the relevant criteria and minimum safeguards. So this is, yeah, see here that that's in an extra, let's say, check that is now been introduced. That's not really described in the EU taxonomy, but now, yeah, comes forward with this answer in the Q&A. And that we thought this would maybe be good to make our webinar participants familiar with. And this also begs the question, how should one do that? So depending on the manufacturer, what criteria do you need to check? And that's also something we are not 100% sure yet, whether that are the checks described in chapter 3 or chapter 4, but there are criteria, let's say, for manufacturers of renewable energy products. So that's definitely something that it needs further investigation and highly relevant. And it brings forward also a second part, because the Q&A brings forward this, let's say, somewhat arbitrary example of solar panels. And one could ask the question why this example was chosen, because if we look normally into chapter 7 of the EU taxonomy, section 7.6 describes the criteria for renewable energy. So the question arises, does this also hold for manufacturers of other items described in 7.6? Let's say the purchase and the installation of heat pumps. Or another example could be 7.3, which describes the criteria for insulation materials, or for instance, energy efficient windows or doors. And that's yeah, a question that we have and that we're really interested to find out. So yeah, again, I think this is a really good example of, yeah, the nitty-gritty of the Q&As and really what that brings forward in terms of consequences and basically also some potentially some extra work and also some extra checks. And I think a last one that is interesting from the Q&A is that in this Q&A that was first published in 2023, but only this month officially published in the journal, there's also an answer, a question and an answer in relation to how to designate new constructions. And that's answer 24 on top of the screen. And it states that, yeah, the client's contractual relationship underlying the building, it's not the most beautifully phrased sentence, but that's how it's phrased, but that should be assessed. So where the contract of the client is for construction of a new building, 7.1 should be assessed. Yeah, and typically when you fund new construction, this is often the case that there is an element of a purchase or construction in the contract. And the reason why we want to highlight that is that there's multiple Q&As now that have been published in the official journal. For instance, also in the lower black box, the Commission noticed on climate delegated act provisions. It was published a year before. Also list a couple of questions and answers in relation on how to designate new constructions. Just for reference, I've copy-pasted these here, and you see that there's, yeah, what you could describe as somewhat of an ambiguity on yeah, how these answers relate to each other. And it's a little bit of a balancing act because, yeah, both Commission notes are equally valid. They're both published. But sometimes a certain answer points in a certain direction and another answer points towards another direction, specifically on how to designate, for instance, the funding of new constructions. And that's something we wanted to make you aware of as well, and something we have also incorporated in the Engage template. So somewhat of a decision tree can be distilled from here, because now with this latest answer, we also have to look into, yeah, the situation in terms of a decision tree. So where the contract of the client is for construction of a new building, this is really now a question we have to ask ourselves in the designation of the applicable taxonomy criteria. So starting left, are we funding a homeowner or an entity? This is an important one. So already the Q&A says if you're funding an entity, 7.1 is applicable. But if you're funding a residential homeowner, which is not an entity, we have to look into the client's contractual relationship underlying the building. Remember, that was in the previous sheet here on top. 24, answer 24 states that we have to look into this. So we have to now distill, and that's highlighted in green here, is the contract towards the client for the construction of a new building, or is it for the purchase of the building? And really based on that, we have to follow the decision tree to either follow substantial contribution criteria 7.7 or 7.1. And also what we've highlighted here, and this will be part of the coming update of the Engage template, is that there are some additional checks if we use 7.1. And namely that when the building is larger than 5,000 square meters, we also have to check, for instance, some other checks on air tightness and global warming potential according to the EU taxonomy. So yeah, let's say this somewhat complex decision tree is embedded in our Engage template, and we want to make this as transparent as possible. Not only in the template, but also towards the stakeholders on how do we derive towards certain, let's say, assumptions from the taxonomy, or how do we interpret the taxonomy. And the core of this message is that we take into account always the various commission notice documents that have been published to really have an integral and adequate view of the taxonomy checks. And maybe a last point that I'd like to make on this is that, and that might not be fully aware to everyone, but of course also the economic activity 7.1, so funding new construction, is in essence a temporary activity. So typically, the building phase takes maybe 1-2 years. So 7.1 is applicable before the construction, during the construction, but at a certain date, point in time, the building is finished and it's being used. And at that time, you basically switch from not funding the construction activity, even though you might fund the same building, but you're funding home ownership. So that's acquisition and ownership 7.7. So this is again an example of a dynamic that really is within the EU taxonomy that is maybe good to highlight, and that's also incorporated in the template. So this templates, very shortly, these are available for registered users. We have the guiding documentation upon request, but also the example files. So have a look into that. But also we have a document where we really describe how we came to designing these or translating the EU taxonomy into concrete data requirements on really a loan by loan or collateral by collateral basis. Currently, we have version 1.1 available, and it's really focused on existing buildings, acquisition and home ownership. And we're now working on version 1.2, which we will publish in the early next year, where we also will take into account the economic activities for new constructions and renovations. And also maybe interesting to mention is we're also taking into account the finance emission data as needs to be reported for some entities under the CSRD. Here's an example of the guiding documentation. I will not go through it because it's available for registered users, but there's all kinds of examples where we explain really the data, how we interpret it, and how we convert it to the individual data elements. And we try to make this as, let's say, tangible as possible, again, with things like this, the decision trees. The most important part is that we want to explain the template that is available, how it's built. So we already explained it's built upon the template that's published by ESMA, Annex 2. It's an add-on to this regulatory template with additional data fields. And we want to showcase how it works. So we've made a couple of columns in this Excel spreadsheet that is available. And really, if you filter on the building block with fields denoted by a 0, you get the original regulatory template as published by ESMA. But when you filter with a 1, you get our Engage add-on data fields. Now, when you look into what we call the additional block 1 fields, we explain per economic activity which data fields we use in our assessments, in our checks. So we have certain data fields that we need on a loan or collateral level for 7.71, 7.7.2, etc. And yeah, you could easily filter that in Microsoft Excel with a yes or no for that particular column. So in that way, it's really transparent. Next, I want to give the word to my colleague to showcase the portal.
Yes, thank you, Vincent. I'm gonna switch to the portal, so give me a second. Yes, so I'm happy to talk about the portal in real life for the first time. And as with every good, I can think, a portal and website, I first have to log in order to make sure that everything works fine. Give me a second, please. Okay, you should be able to see my screen right now. So I have to log in, and we also installed a multi-factor, so that's also something I have to do. And I will take you through the steps that the user will take right now in order to make the checks be done on the data set. So of course it's a portal. A lot of the magic is under the hood, but I will still show you what you will see in the front end and what is going on at the back. So first, let's add a file. I would just call it webinar for now. We have the version 1.1. I have to select a file. And here I upload it to the portal. As you might see, there's already a couple of programs that we've put into the portal, the two lending institutions that are part of the consortium, and for Hypoport Bank for this webinar purpose. So we also made our own dummy Hypoport data in order to do this little test. So we're not using UCI or WONU data. Also, ultimately, when you start using the portal, there will be a legal framework in order to make sure that data processing happens on a safe and lawful way. So yeah, it's now picked up, so it's in progress. And it gives me the time to talk about the fact that there's a setting on this portal that allows you to be really precise with the authentications and rights a single user has. So now in my case, because I have all the rights on the portal, I'm able to see all three programs. However, when we start fully using this with multiple parties, everybody from the same program will have only the rights to upload and to download for their own program. However, for example, if multiple parties have the same investor, then we can also say that an account from the investor should be able to view, so not upload, only view multiple different programs in order to share certain results that are made after analyzing the data. So let's see. So now we are at step 4 out of 10, and what's now going on is basically twofold. We have some data checks and also some taxonomy alignment checks. And I want to quickly show you how those data quality checks look like. Might be familiar to some of you, but this is really on how the data fields and columns within the file relate. There are some different codes and some different definitions, but I just want to talk you through about 3 of them. For example, the first one, we have the prime energy demand of the building equal to ND5, and then nearly zero energy building ends up threshold is populated. it's an inconsistency according to our current check, and therefore we will flag it in the feedback file at the end of the check. Different item might be the issuance date of the most recent available energy performance certificate registration earlier than the construction permit application date. Also an indication that some of the data might be inconsistent, and that you might want to take a look in how to make this even more, make it cleaner, so to say. And lastly, a different type of check with the building unit in the top 15% indicator is equal to yes when a construction permit application date is after 2020. Also an inconsistency that you might want to take a look at in your data. So let's go back to the portal. We should now be at, yes, 7 out of 7. And then the second check, that is what my colleague Vincent will talk about later, is the more detailed taxonomy alignment report, how it does compare to other checks and the other items of the of the data. And lastly, check is done. We can download the report, and that's it for the portal demo for now. Over to you, back to you, Vincent.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, we had to switch computers 1 second. So here I have an example of the output report that we have created. It's on the EU taxonomy breakdown. And what you see here on the left-hand side is really the breakdown of the economic activity, 7.1 all the way to 7.7, and the different subsections. For now, in this first version, we have focused on 7.7. But you see here that we've already made the report available to do all the checks. And that's, I think, relevant also with the new version of the template that will be published, version 1.2, in earlier in the new year. So the template really gives a detailed breakdown on the assessment of all the sub-criteria. And I think that's now a missing part in the existing EU taxonomy reporting that we see in Article 8 in the annual accounts. Basically, everything is compressed towards the green asset ratio, which is one number. And maybe in the appendix, there's a breakdown into home loans and renovation loans. But there's not really a more detailed breakdown into all the sub-criteria of the, or sub-activities of the EU taxonomy. And that's something that we have introduced. And I'll give you an example here of the portfolio that we have. So for instance, the 7.7 portfolio on acquisition and ownership of buildings, we see here that the 1.1 template does a really detailed breakdown of all the criteria listed in 7.7. So there are 3 different criteria here. So whether the building, for buildings built before 31st of December, if they have an EPC of Class A, as an alternative for buildings built before 2021, if the building is in the top 15, and lastly, for buildings built after 31st of December, so these are relatively new buildings, we have the NZ minus 10% check criteria. So we've made this breakdown here for all these sub-economic activities that we can indicate really based on this very detailed loan by loan and collateral data, which loans really pass these checks. And this breakdown is given in substantial contribution checks, do no significant harm checks, and also the sum of these two. So that's the total of the technical screening criteria, substantial contribution plus do no significant harm on the right-hand side. And that's really the part that we can take into account for the green asset ratio. But we have a much more detailed and nuanced view here because we've also divided that into the individual number of loans that pass these checks, the number of building units, and the balance related to that. And this gives a much more detailed view because there are sometimes situations that we have seen or learned from many of the pilot banks that we have been in discussion with, is that there's sometimes a difference that some loans pass the substantial contribution check, for instance, but not the do no significant harm check. An example could be that we have a relative energy efficient building with an EPC of class A, so 7.71, but it could be that as a result of the do no significant harm assessment, the building is located in a location that has a relatively high flood risk, for instance. So then it does not always pass the do no significant harm check. And with this template, we can really give a much more detailed view on how the taxonomy assessment process works and which loans pass which individual check. And so this breakdown is given in this report. And there's also another element, for instance, the relation between loan and building units. And we see that there's a variety across Europe because not in all cases one loan is tied to one building unit. There are, of course, some deviations. Sometimes multiple loans are tied to one building unit or the other way around. And in this way, we can really give a transparent overview on how that works. And also in terms of the relative performance. So whereas the previous slide showed the absolute performance, here we see how this relates to the total of the portfolio. So you could really see this as almost a green asset ratio on a portfolio level. And this is really something that I think is interesting because of course, there's not an official obligation to report it on a loan level in purely EU Taxonomy Article 8. But we see in other regulations that are now published, for instance, the EU Green Bond Regulation, where you need to report on the individual loans in terms of the use of proceeds. How this EU Taxonomy check is done and how that relates, for instance, to the total portfolio. So I think this is a real interesting part, and that can really be used also for EU Green Bond reporting. I think I saw a question. Let me see if I can pop it up on the screen somewhere. Okay. No, I can see it now. Okay, I'll do questions at the end if that's all right with you. I would like to give for this last part the word to my colleague Gianluca on really how to participate in the Engage project.
Thank you so much, Vincent. Hi, everyone. Yes, exactly. In this last part, we would like to explain you how you can participate to the project or in general, download the template or let's say, get information about this initiative. As a first point in this slide, we would like to explain you why become a test user of Engage. As Vincent said at the beginning, this template is valid for any kind of portfolio, obviously home related. So we have the mortgages portfolio, portfolio that are securitized or cover bond. You have to imagine that one part is about the loan and the collateral, and this is very, very related to the ESMA templates, Annex 2. And then you have another part specific for the Engage information. information that obviously are strictly related with the data points asked in the EU Climate Delegate Act. Then also another, let's say, reason is that if you decided to use the template, you have the possibility to be guided in the, let's say, in the to fill out the template. Let's say, so you have a dedicated person that can help you to fill out the fields. There is a specific taxonomy that explains you the information you should enter. So every time you have the possibility to have a conversation with someone. So something that, in our opinion, it's very, very valuable. Then I want to stress again the fact that for each loan for which you are going to provide information, you can assess the alignment of this loan with the EU Climate Delegate Act, in particular with Article 7.7 and 7.1. And the last point, I would say that is a solution developed by the industry. So we are collaborating with the pilots of this project, but we engage discussion also with other banks. So it's something that, let's say, has been developed according to the industry's needs and industry standards, and also according to the information that, let's say, are available. Exactly. So this is just to give you an overview why become a test user of the Engage portal. Next slide, please. But now, just to give you a bit more of information, let's start with really concrete steps. So at the moment, you can download the template through a link that you obviously will find in the slides that we are going to circulate later. And at the moment, this is the version 1.1. At the moment, more than 60 institutions have requested the access to the Engage templates. So as I said, it's something that is getting, let's say, a sort of industry standards, I would say. Then you will have a demonstration of the Engage template. We will send you a sample file and the taxonomy. And as I said previously, the process is guided. You will be guided in the to navigate through the template. So it's something that really can be, let's say, do step by step with the pilot or with the person interested in this template. And also we can give you basically the possibility to submit the template as you see as we showed before. There is a specific portal where you can submit the information, and we already have checks on the data quality checks on the information you are going to submit, plus also a very nice report that gives you an overview of your portfolio in terms of alignment with the EU Climate Delegate Act, something that Vincent described very well before. And obviously, at the moment, there are no costs until November 2025. So there is still plenty of time for, let's say, starting the template, testing the template, for testing the templates. Next slide, please. And now to conclude, we want to give you an idea about the next webinar series of the Engage. So obviously in December we have no session, but starting from January we start again to update you on the developments of the portal, but also on the Engage template, because it's still something that we are developing, because as we know, inside the Climate Delegate Act, we have obviously information article for the existing building and new building, but we have also the part for the renovation, something that we are developing. So the next webinar will be on the 3rd of January, then on February 27, and also in March 27. And we will keep you updated, obviously, through LinkedIn and Engage newsletter. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think we have completed. Vincent, if you want to add something, feel free to do it.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Gianluca. I think maybe good to at the end respond to questions. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. So maybe to start with the first question we've received from Hans. Yeah, how does our template or the roadmap of our template relate to the HDT of the energy efficient mortgage label? Yeah, I think mainly in three areas. How it relates. I can devise what is different. For us, there's really a hard, concrete, let's say, definition of what is green. In our case, we use the criteria of the EU Taxonomy. I'm not 100% sure if that's per se underlying the HDDT as of the latest version per se. I think also proprietary definitions can still be applied. So that's, I think, yeah, difference number one. Difference number two is that, of course, I think the HDT is a very much a aggregate report, and we are the opposite. We are, yeah, quite a more granular, detailed report with really detailed loan by loan or collateral by collateral data in relation to energy efficiency and climate risks. And I think also thirdly, we have quite, I think, as illustrated by this very webinar, a really active, I would say, governance structure around this template. So the very fact that we spent so much time in this webinar on, again, here, the latest Q&A, the latest interpretation of the EU taxonomy, that's really something that is at the core of our project here in Engage, that we also always want to have the latest information from the regulator in that template. And thereby, I think both templates serve potentially different. They are related, but different purposes. Ours is really hardcore and detailed in that sense on the EU taxonomy. And I think the HCT is a little bit more flexible and in terms of the criteria that are applied, and a bit more high level. And I think there are use cases for both. And I hope this answers the question, Hans. Are there any other questions or remarks? Well, if that's okay, if that's not the case, I think we leave it with this. Thank you for everyone for taking the time to participate. We will be sharing the slides, the recording. Please register for the next couple of webinars in the new year. Yeah, thank you for dialing in.
Thank you.